pleasure hunting goes along with this, right? It's focusing on what is working, what does feel like good to you, and doing more of it.
You're listening to In Your Pants with Dr. Susie G, the physiotherapist for your private, helping you get in the know, down the low.
Hey friends, Dr. Susie G here, and welcome to another In Your Pants podcast. I'm so happy that you can be here with us today. So on today's show, we're going to be talking about fun, fearless pleasure, and how you can connect with your own sexual identity, sexual voice, and freedom. And to help me do this, I've brought on my fearless colleague and really good friend, Dr. Rose Schlaff, who's an intimacy coach and pelvic physical therapist. In particular, some of the things that we go into include what are some of the common barriers to pleasure and intimacy, both solo and partnered. We're going to go pleasure hunting with you, and we're going to help you find ways to feel good both in and out of the bedroom. We talk about safety and boundaries and why this is so important and must be prioritized in order for you to fully step into your pleasure zone. And lastly, we talk about how to build a web of support, to find your dream team for sexy time, to help support you through some physical, emotional, or both of these challenges or different life milestones that we may encounter throughout our life. And so we give you some of those tools and strategies to help you build that web of support. And Dr. Rose has been so kind to also share with us a freebie. Y'all know how much I love freebies. Dr. Rose has a fun, fearless pleasure guide that is available to you, and that can be found in the podcast show notes by visiting drsusieg.com. That's drsusieg.com. So before we dive into this really fun, fearless episode, let me formally introduce Dr. Rose. Dr. Rose Schlaff is an intimacy coach and pelvic physical therapist. She supports women all over the world in her virtual coaching practice, where she helps women overcome barriers to intimacy and reclaim lives that are filled with fun, fearless pleasure. In addition to her virtual coaching practice, Dr. Rose is a guest lecturer for the University of Michigan's Human Sexuality Certificate Program, San Diego State University's Marriage and Family Therapy Sexuality and Intimacy course, and she has had the opportunity to lecture internationally on the topic of sexual and pelvic health in Beijing, China. So this is definitely a fun episode. Dr. Rose and I are very playful and are completely ourselves in this episode, so I really hope you enjoy it and really take to heart some of the tips and strategies that we provide so that you can connect with your pleasure, with your intimacy, and empower yourself to lean into these, somewhat vulnerable spaces that we might find ourselves in. So we're here for you, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Rose, thank you so much for being on the show today. Woo! I brought my blue I Heart Scut plush penis to the show today. And I also brought our vulva puppet here, purple with light purple tones of lips as well. So the clitoris and clitoral hurt, all yummy stuff. Again, this is what we're talking about today. We're talking about pleasure hunting, sex, desire, barriers to pleasure and intimacy. So let's just jump right in. So, Rose, let's talk about what are some of the most common barriers to pleasure and intimacy for folks?
Okay, so getting out of your head is like one of the biggest ones. And right before we pressed record, we were just talking about the human experience of like all the garbage thoughts that run through each of our heads, right?
I like that, garbage thoughts, because it's true. They're not facts.
Right. It's just stories, and we just tell ourselves them because we're humans, and we can just look at them and say, like, is that true? I don't think that about Susie. I don't think that about Rose, right? But yeah, like how many of us have been in a pleasurable experience in and out of the bedroom and had your brain just go somewhere else? Like to-do list. Oh, I forgot to switch over the laundry. Okay, what do I need to get from the grocery store, right? Like, oh man, there's some, a friend of mine always talks about like her partner hangs the robe on the bedroom door, and it's like, if she can see that robe, like, oh God, I hate when they do that. So getting in your head, right? That's the number one. And then also just what society has kind of like told us sex looks like, pleasure looks like. So many of us feel like we're doing it wrong, right? Like, okay, so I basically like laid on top of my partner. We like wiggled around for a minute and neither of us had an orgasm. So like, what am I doing wrong, right?
Yeah. I must be broken. Something's wrong with me, right?
Exactly. So I think like that's a really common one. And then one that Susie and I talk about all the time can be physical pain or discomfort, right? So not just emotional pain or discomfort, but actually having physical barriers to intimacy. So there's a lot of different resources on this podcast, especially, but muscles, hormones, nervous system, immune system, right? All these different things can be contributing to this physical response. And I talk a lot about peeling the onion. It's all about like looking at the onion, okay, peeling one layer away, peeling the next layer, like, and a lot of the time we start with like, okay, let's peel away the pelvic floor muscles. Like those are working well. Okay, now we're like looking at the hormones, we're peeling that layer. Okay, now we're looking at the thoughts. Now we're peeling that layer. So it's all about the onion.
It is. And it's our experiences, including our biology, are multidimensional. Right?
It's true. It's true.
So many factors involved with our feelings, how we experience the world, how we navigate certain contexts and situations and relationships. And all of that is, again, just a accumulation of our experiences, our lenses, our predictions, our anticipations, our fears, our vulnerabilities, our strengths. I mean, all of these factors play into our experiences. And if we're going to, as you're saying, Rose, like peel the layers at a time, I'm hearing you say, like, let's be aware of what those barriers are. Let's name those barriers, right?
And naming it is so powerful because we're all experiencing these things because we're human. And something that, we've talked about, it's just naming the human experience. We all feel so alone. We all feel like the one weirdo, and we're not.
Right. 100%. 100%. So speaking of not feeling weird and not feeling weird, why are boundaries, let's talk about boundaries and safety and why that needs to be like on the top of the list when it comes to experiencing pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that boundaries and safety are a really important piece of the puzzle to start eliminating some of these barriers. And so when we feel safe, we can fully relax and let go. And that is pleasurable, right? And sometimes I talk about boundaries with food because I think people understand food more than almost everything else, right? It's pretty universal. So for example, like if you are at a dinner party and you had like a deadly walnut allergy and you just didn't tell a single person and you showed up to this dinner party and you're like, oh my God, I just hope that there's no walnuts in this. Like every bite you're taking, you're like, do I taste a hint of walnut? Is there walnut in this? Right. And you're on high alert. You're constantly thinking about walnuts. You're not present in the dinner party experience. So, if you were to say to the host, like, hey, I have a walnut allergy, it would be really great if none of my food touched the walnuts. And if you gave me a heads up, if there's just a sea of walnuts anywhere in your home that I can just avoid, right? And just having that conversation, just speaking it out loud, like, hey, I'm really worried about these walnuts for a legitimate reason. I think it just helps us feel safe and set some boundaries around what's okay with me, what's not okay with me. So, for an example of sex and intimacy, say, you just got home from a really long day, you're really not feeling like having sex. Anytime your partner is like holding your hand or giving you a kiss or giving you a hug, you're kind of like your barrier's up. You're like, God, I don't want this to turn into sex. Like, I don't even want to navigate this. And if you can have kind of like a conversation about either, hey, ahead of time, here's some good times where I'm open to sex, or here's some times when I'm open to this activity, or a quick check-in of saying, hey, like, I don't want to have sex tonight, but I'd really love to cuddle, or I'd really love to hold hands, or I'd really love to kiss. You can actually let go and enjoy those things, right? Instead of worrying about what's next, worrying about what's this going to lead to.
So still maintaining that intimacy, the connection with your partner, instead of just completely disregarding their bid, is what I'm hearing. Like you're
Mm-hmm.
still connecting, building relationship, strengthening your relationship, but also honoring your needs and negotiating with your partner, saying, hey, I'm not really up for that. But here's what I am up for, like you're saying, Rose, or this is a time, can we get back to this on, Saturday after we have a dinner and I can decompress,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yep. Yeah.
Communication.
It's so huge. And also just like naming that sometimes it's uncomfortable to just come out with it and say, here's where I'm at and here's where I need. Like, that is so vulnerable, and vulnerability can feel really scary. And oftentimes I'll do this exercise with clients where it's red light, green light, yellow light. It's like you do it ahead of time. You just sit down together and you're like, green light items are, this is what I always love. Like, this always feels good to me. Yellow light is like, this sometimes feels good, this sometimes doesn't. And here's why. Here's the context, just so you know. And then red light is, this is what I'm never down for. Like, I'm never down for walnuts. So like, don't even try to put it in the pesto. Right.
Right.
And so I think that having that understanding of like, okay, here's our green, yellow, and red, and here's the context for which yellow happens. I think it shows how safety can help you get some of those yellows into the green. Like, I had a client who, like, every time her husband rubbed her back, he would try to have sex with her afterwards. And she's like, I can't even enjoy massages. Like, massages I always just think it's this like exchange for me. I can't even relax and enjoy it. And after doing this activity with him and saying, massages are a yellow, here's the context when you expect sex afterwards, he was like, oh, well, I actually really just enjoy giving you massages. So what if we just had a massage date and then you just went to sleep? And it became this beautiful way for them to connect and for her to experience pleasure and connection with her partner, right? Because of that clarity, because of that boundary.
That is such a beautiful example, and I so appreciate you sharing that. And even that little exercise, as far as opening communication, figuring out what's red light, green light, yellow light, but then having flexibility within that, because as you're saying, context is going to matter. And if there's an anticipation because there's a predictive response, right? Like, oh, every time this happens, then this is where it goes. Of course, you're going to be defensive and avoidant of even participating in any activity that might result in something you just don't want to do,
Right.
right? So what a beautiful way to demonstrate turning towards each other in that moment, right? And as Barry McCarthy would say, erotic allies. You turn towards each other as erotic allies rather than enemies
Right.
or strangers.
Right. And then it's also like taking out that gray area. I mean, we have talked about our brains are really, really good at telling us stories. And it's like, if we have a gray area of like, I don't know what you're feeling and what your behavior is meaning, we make a lot of stories. We make a lot of interpretations. And, her husband might have been thinking like, wow, just doesn't even want me to touch her anymore because she hates me, or she's not attracted to me, or maybe there's somewhere else where, having this communication of, hey, I'm really tired after work and I don't feel up to sex, but I do really love you and I do really love our connection and I do want you to touch me because I do enjoy that. That's clarity, right? And clear is kind.
Yes, I love that. I love that. Exactly. Clarity. Clear is kind. Love it. Beautiful. So let's segue into exploring, like, pleasure hunting, as we kind of introduced the show. Pleasure hunting. Can you tell us what does it mean to go pleasure hunting, and how you work with your clients to discover that pleasure?
Yeah. So I think a lot of us have like a very clear understanding of the things that we don't like, the things that annoy us, the things that are like, or even like big emotions that feel negative at the time, like like, oh, I have like this knot in my stomach. I'm very, very connected to how anger feels or how sadness feels. And I think that sometimes it's hard to even identify like, what do I want? Because we never really spend time thinking about that. Our brain is so set up to protect us that we aren't focusing on what we don't want. And really, like, this is, I always say, this is like taking a road trip and saying like, I just really don't want to go to Arizona. Like, I hate Arizona. Like, I don't want to go there. And you're like, cool, but what do I pack? Which direction do we drive in? What activities are we going to do? And until you really think about like, hey, what do I want? And start building out that roadmap, building out that pack list, it's really hard to get there to that space. And so I think pleasure hunting goes along with this, right? It's focusing on what is working, what does feel like good to you, and doing more of it. And I really encourage people to use every single sense in and out of the bedroom, right? It's not just about, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, thank you. Here I am on the other end. I mean, for those of you who are just listening, I'm like,
Woo,
my
woo,
hands
woo.
are going up in the air. I'm making all these weird faces. Yes, just to agree with everything that you're saying.
Susan's got green light vibes going on.
I do. I really do that. Or just like this quad shot latte that I just had. It's really getting to me right now.
I mean, just anytime we talk, this is the vibe. So
yes, it is.
We couldn't expect anything less.
Absolutely
But,
not.
but really, like, I think that using every sense you have and like honoring that pleasure as this sacred experience, like, you know, something as simple as, this is something I struggle with. Like, I am such a learner. I love podcasts. I love information. And sometimes I have to consciously be like, listen to music. It gives you pleasure. Like, it gives you joy, and it's worth investing in. And even sometimes that conscious effort of, it's not my first thought, like, oh, I want to listen to In Your Pants. I want to listen to a different podcast, you know, like, but every time I do it and I turn on the music, then I'm like in my body, and then I feel different. And really just noticing how you experience pleasure in your body, because I think that awareness of the physical manifestation of good feelings is often not there. We're often very aware of what hard feelings feel like in our body, but like pleasure to me just feels like this like expansiveness in my stomach, and it's just like open, and I feel ease in my chest and this kind of like warmth, and we never really think about that, right? And even something as simple as, you know, redirecting yourself back to your body during a pleasurable experience where you're getting sucked into your head. Like, for example, I love dancing. I love, love, love dancing. And still, sometimes in my beloved dance class that I wait an entire week for, I find myself in my head thinking my little thoughts, you know, doing my brain thing. And I'm like, it's outside too, Susie. It's such a beautiful experience. I'm like, feel the sun on my face. My skin feels good in the sun. Okay, feel the breeze in my hair. Feel the grass under my feet. Feel how it feels to move in my body. And I go through my senses, like feel this or smell what grass smells like, right? All these different things to re-center. And so when we shift our focus to pleasure, when we ask ourselves what we do want, what that feels like in our body, and how we're experiencing it with every sense, we can also help ground us in these pleasurable experiences.
100%. Anything can be an experience where we slow down, take the time to notice, as you're saying, get out of our head and just feel and think later. And everything that you just said and named about being in tune with that takes awareness. It takes effort to purposefully and intentionally put that into practice. This is a practice, really making it part of your lifestyle. And the other thing I wanted to just add to that is, I don't know if folks realize this, but when we take the time to breathe, to touch, to smell, to feel, to slow down, to just be, we are literally changing our biology, right? Like we are literally changing in real time our cells, our molecules in our body. And in what direction? what I'm talking about is immune system, hormone system, inflammatory responses. As David Butler, Laura Mosley were saying, sprint and split, those processes that are involved in like body tension, right? And contraction and fast breathing. Like all of the things that you're saying, Rose, is about, hey, let's stop and smell the roses. I had to say it. I had to say
it. See the world through rose-colored glasses.
It's
That's
we
right. Had to.
I know,
we had to.
I just had to go there, Rose. I love you. Yeah. So like these things sound so nominal, right? And like, oh, how could that ever do anything? But listen, folks, we are in a world that we're distracted, on the go. There's always a sense of urgency. And guess what? That is going into the bedroom with you, into your sexual and intimate experiences and relationships. And without that awareness, without that slowing down, you're not going to have a balance, right? And to be able to appreciate, to recognize what you're saying, Rose, pleasure.
Yeah. And let's talk about mirror neurons too, right? If we're going to get into the physiology of it, like the things that you are thinking about, your body, your brain finds evidence of, right? If you've ever been pregnant and you're like, oh my God, I see pregnant people and babies everywhere. Or if you've ever thought about buying like a red minivan, you're like, wow, I see so many red minivans everywhere. It's like your brain is collecting evidence.
Yeah.
And it's saying like, hey, I want to prove to myself, like I'm searching for this. And as soon as you name it and start the practice, it becomes easier and easier and easier because your whole body, your brain, your nervous system get on board. And they're like, oh, okay, we're no longer searching for danger and protection. We're going to search for pleasure. Okay, I can get on board with this.
That's right. And it takes time. So Rose, how do you help folks so speaking of that, who have pain, persistent pain that is protecting, because pain is protection, right? I mean, we tell our clients and patients that all the time, like pain is a protector, and sometimes it can get overly protective and really sensitive. And what is your brain going to attend to pain? Because that takes priority. It's for survival. And so how do you help your clients shift gently, of course, like shift their attention away from pain to be able to find that pleasure? Because for me, I know it's challenging. It can be really challenging.
It is. It absolutely is. And let's just hold some space for the challenge that is there. And this is a difficult journey, and so many medical providers, so many providers in general just don't have a depth of understanding, and can invalidate or can, minimize this. And this can be really impactful in so many different areas of your life. And so I think we want to name that, hold space for that, and also say, you're not alone. You're not the only one feeling that. And also there's ways that we can move out of it. Right. And so I think that these couple things, right? So let's talk about red, yellow, green here. So I had a client who felt a lot of protective mechanisms, even with like touching of the outer thighs, right? And so I am all about the baby step and the baby step backwards. Like, let's go 5% safer, 5% safer, 5% safer. So for her, like touching her outside thighs was a red. I was like, okay, what's 5% more yellow? And she's like, well, maybe like touching 2 inches lower. I'm like, okay, what's 5% more yellow? And then she's like, okay, maybe touching like the top of my thighs above my knees. And, we got to this place where I was like, is this comfortable for you to stay at? And she tried it and she's like, no, it's still not. And so I was like, okay, what if we just visualized? What if we just visualized in your brain? We had a guided meditation that brought her into a nervous system space of safety, right? So we talked about, how your cells change. So we reminded her of what's pleasurable, right? Focusing on connection, focusing on joy, putting music that you like, putting essential oil that smells good, giving yourself a hand massage before you do this visualization, right? How can we prioritize pleasure before this activity So you're in a space of pleasure, and then close your eyes and just without doing any type of touch in real life, visualize your hands on your thighs. Hold that. Can we breathe here? Okay. Do we need to make it 5% less yellow with the visualization? Okay. Are we going down to your knees and then coming back up to your thighs? So it's fluid. It's a process. Every person is different, but we have to meet you where you are and move forward with baby steps. And I love the green, yellow, red because it gives such a beautiful vocabulary to communicate with me and also your partner too, right? That's feeling a little bit red, yellow today. Like let's do something that's on the green list, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it and you've kind of alluded to this, but how context is going to play, right? Your brain and these protective systems, the protective buffer is a dynamic buffer. It's not just okay, it's here and it's just staying here, and I'm using my hands to kind of show like here's the stop and here's the stop in a very narrow
We're having
window.
a Vogue moment.
Right, a Vogue. There you go. Thank you. A Vogue moment here, right? But that protective buffer is dynamic and always changing based on context. And so who's doing the touching, when they're doing the touching. And you've mentioned this, Rose, like if I'm touching here, how about when they're just touching, they're more in control? How can you be in more control, right?
Yeah.
The green, yellow, red light activity gives agency and empowers someone to be able to clearly, as you're saying, Rose, be clear and communicate what's safe, what's exploratory, what we can explore, and what's really just off limits at the moment.
Yeah. And it's dynamic. And let's talk about power and control, because that's a huge part of safety too.
Let's go into it.
I oftentimes will play with power dynamics with couples as well. So it's like, I have another client who she has been on this journey with pain for quite some time. And her feedback for me was, I feel very vulnerable. I feel like I'm the only one who has the problem in this relationship. I'm the only one who's doing this work. And I was like, well, why don't we make this more of a communal situation? And the way that the perfect recipe for them, which is this is all individual and this is something that is dynamic, but for her, we used it's called Sensate Focus, which is, I know Susie, you know about this, but it's all about, there's one giver, one receiver, and kind of playing with that dynamic. We set up before she ever did any work on her desensitization for herself. She would use her little vibrating dilator, which just looks like a bullet vibe for anyone listening who is not a pelvic PT. She would use it on her partner, anywhere on his body that he was comfortable with. And so he was the receiver first. And so she got to feel empowered. She got to feel like she was in control. And then they would switch, and then she would give directions and say, okay, stop, go. This is where you're going to go. This is when you're going to stop. So she was still in control and in power. And it's a very different dynamic than them going into the bedroom, her laying down, getting undressed, and him doing whatever with a dilator, right?
That is awesome. Again, I love these examples, real life examples of ways that folks are modeling communication, flexibility, vulnerability, and navigating these spaces, and you being the guide, the coach, the rumble strips on the highway, right? They're the drivers. But you're just, they're putting in where they want to go, right? And you're just saying like, hey, I'm here to help you stay in your lane and still help you get to that destination when you're feeling tired, when you're feeling like the drive is just taking a toll on you, when you need a break. Like those that's really the role, right, of a coach, an intimacy coach, a sex coach, health coach, counselor, like all of those, and even a clinician, practitioner who offers that space for someone to recognize that we need to address you as a whole person, because you as a whole person are multifaceted.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I think people will really resonate with those examples and relate to them. I know I do.
Yeah.
So tell us about, speaking of practitioners and health providers, etc. Great segue into, how do you find your sexy dream team?
Yeah, I love it. So we have talked a lot about collaboration because I think it's so beautiful to build your team. And I think a lot of the time navigating the medical system can just feel like this system of lily pads. And there's just like a lot of
That's a great
water
way to
in the
put it.
middle where you're like, I don't know if I'm going to make the leap here. Like, let's right? And I think that finding a collaborative team can expand the lily pad, and also finding someone who has like a more holistic approach can expand the lily pad. So, this is something that I really believe deeply in. We all have such unique experiences professionally, personally, and you're going to get a different flavor from every individual. And, we've talked about this, Susie. I will have people who I'm working with oftentimes work through your DIY course, because even though you and I have very similar like values, we're very aligned in how we treat, you say things slightly differently and I say things slightly differently. And if you hear two talking heads saying the same thing, you're like, oh man, when Susie talked about the rumble strips, then I got it,
Yes, I appreciate you. I appreciate you plugging the pelvic pain program. I really do. Thank you.
Yeah, I love it because it's such a beautiful way to expand that lily pad, get that ongoing support, right? And that's the same reason why when somebody is working with me and I'm doing intimacy and sex coaching with them, I oftentimes am getting a pelvic floor PT in person to say, hey, what are the pelvic floor muscles looking like? What's the tissue looking like? How are desensitization activities going hands-on? And then I'm getting an EMDR therapist on board for any trauma or any past experience that people want to dive more deeply into. Because as a coach, I really, I stay in my lane, right? I say, where do you want to go? Let me give you practical, easy baby steps to get you there. We're going to take you from where you are and move you forward. And if there's stuff that's holding you back, let's get other practitioners on board. Let's talk about it. And having that communication with trusted providers, you and I can have a conversation of, hey, so-and-so gave me permission to talk to you about this. What do you think about their progression so far hands-on? What do you think about their progression so far in coaching? What do you think their progression so far in therapy? And as a naturopath, right, there's hormone specialists, there's all these different pieces to the pie that we can build together. But I think that we need to commit to talking to each other as providers and commit to this collaboration as someone who navigates the system.
Agreed. And then that's a paradigm shift, Rose. Like I hear what you're saying, because that's something that I'm also passionate about saying, let's put our egos down and let's realize that, again, our biology and a human being, us, we are complex individuals. Our experiences are so unique. How could we possibly think in a very simplistic way to say it's a linear process to getting well, or to whatever it is, the concern that you're having? Like, it is not that straightforward. In fact, it's very much far from being linear. It is a ecosystem approach, and in order to address all of those prongs or all of those parts, you need to have a team. You need to recognize that you have to approach it from that holistic, integrative perspective. And us as providers need to be the ones to say, hey, listen, what you're going through is really, really challenging, and it's overwhelming. And I can hear, you are frustrated. Let's support you from all of these angles, because I can't do it alone. And you shouldn't expect to have to take all of that on your own as well. Let's make the journey a little easier. Let's have people on your team to take some of the load off of your in your backpack, to share that load to so that you can thrive, not just survive, right, Rose? Like thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes a village. And, I really believe in this strongly. And I think that so much beauty comes out of collaboration, because you get little nuggets from each other, and it changes the way you show up as a practitioner too. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Does for me all the time. Yeah. It brings in humility. I don't know everything.
Yeah. Nor should you. You're a human being.
Nobody does, right? Nobody does, but we're humans together.
Yeah.
And all of us have our strengths, and all of us have our unique vulnerabilities, but we come together in a space to be able to share in that humanity. And I think that's really the message that we're driving home, is you don't have to do this alone, and let's connect with folks who are going to offer that space and support and guidance through a difficult time, right?
Mhm.
Speaking of support and resources, a little birdie told me that you have a freebie you want to share with our listeners.
I do.
Yes, let's talk about this
Um,
freebie, Rose.
Yeah, so it goes really well with this conversation of, okay, how do I get started here? Like, what are my next best steps? How do I kind of like it breaks down the 4 steps that I usually use with my private clients to get them from, just really not wanting to go to Arizona to like knowing where you want to go, building that pleasure practice, overcoming barriers, and really just setting yourself up for support. So that's at my website, bewellwithrose.com, and I'll make sure that Susie has a link to it too.
Absolutely. We will definitely share Rose's freebie, and it's called Fun Fearless Pleasure Guide for Easy Steps to Deepen Intimacy. This is yummy, y'all. This is amazing, and you don't want to miss this. Really generous, resourceful guide. It's amazing. I love it. And we so appreciate you sharing that with all of us today. And Rose, how else can folks connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on Instagram, Be Well with Rose. You can also email me, bewellwithrose@gmail.com. I think oftentimes people just don't even know where to begin on this journey sometimes. And I always tell people, even if you don't know if I'm the right person, just reach out, because I have this amazing network of providers that I can refer you to, that are trusted, that are vetted, and we're going to get you to the right place, even if it's not me. And I just want anyone who's listening to this, if any of this resonated with you, I want you to know you're not alone. I talk to people all day long who are experiencing the same things you're experiencing, and we can make it better. We can make your life more pleasure filled and connected and easy. So
what a positive, kind note to end on, Rose. Thank you so much for the work that you do. We, as a world, are so lucky to have you. Thank you so much, and thank you for being on the show today.
yes, thank you. I always love an excuse to talk with you. So
same here. I have that. I have to say, yeah, same here. So
we have too much fun.
I know, we really do. And hopefully, our listeners and viewers had just as much fun with us. Thank you so much for being with us. And until next time, my friends, in loving wellness for your pelvis, this is Dr. Susie G.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to head on over to drsuzyg.com, where you can get more information, show notes, and related articles on today's topic. Also, if you like what you're hearing, head on over to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, and leave us a rating and review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again.